follows an extract from my book Fête Fatale, available from Amazon. Chapter 11, Part 1. The beginning of the week saw the cars of Sergeant Maddox and May Holland both driving out of the village. At the junction on the end of Main Street they split off in opposite directions. Sergeant Maddox made his way to idyllic with considerable pleasure at the prospect of driving the station's car once again. He was driving to keep his appointment with Gareth Foster, who was overhauling John's business affairs. May, with Beth sitting beside her, was heading towards the home of Hyacinth and Conrad Jefferson. "How do you propose to open the conversation?" asked May. "What are you superficially there to talk about?" "I thought we could begin with the pretext of asking Hyacinth to join the WI. I'm not entirely sure that it's only a pretext either. I genuinely think that she'll be glad of some female conversation. I seem to remember that her son is a big businessman in America, and although Conrad appeared to be genuinely trying to make sure she was having a nice time at the fete, I bet he spends most of his time on his business concerns. Drew says he never stops working," said Beth. "I guess that we'll just have to improvise then. I'll take your lead, and if the conversation falls flat, then we'll just have to drive away with our tails between our legs." They drew the car up to the tall wrought-iron electric gates, and Beth got out of the car to walk to the intercom. Pressing the call button, the tone buzzed for a minute until a lady's voice responded. "Hello, who is it, please?" "Hello, Hyacinth, I'm Beth Williams from the WI. We met at the fete." "Oh yes, I remember. How can I help?" "I'm here with May, the WI secretary. We thought we would come and say hi if you're not too busy." "Oh, of course, I'm sorry, I'll open the gates." The intercom switched off and the gates slowly swung into life. Climbing back into the passenger seat, Beth turned to May and said, "Crikey, it's no wonder you said she seemed lonely. For the full book of Fête Fatale, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box, or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. As the car curved around the gravelled driveway, the front door opened and Hyacinth stepped out, evidently happy to see them. "Hello, Beth, it's good of you to come and visit. I hope the fete was a success." She faltered at the end of her sentence as if she'd suddenly realised her tactlessness, remembering that the day had ended with a death. "I've been wanting to try and get to know you for ages, especially as Drew sees Conrad for work now and then. I thought that the fete had given me sufficient introduction to warrant coming over. I've brought my friend May along. May is the secretary of the WI, and we've come to see if we can persuade you to swell our ranks." Beth introduced May to Hyacinth and she followed them through the hallway into the kitchen. Although the kitchen was of undoubtedly expensive design, the overall effect was surprisingly homelike and welcoming. A rich, dark oak table and chairs sat at an angle, and this theme was carried out through the leaded display cabinets and a vast oak dresser laden with spode dinnerware. The ladies naturally gravitated towards the kitchen table and sat down as Hyacinth made the necessary preparations around the teapot. It was the rural rendition of some ancient Chinese tea ceremony and was a necessary part of the breaking down of barriers and getting to know each other. She set down a pot of green tea along with slices of lemon and earthenware mugs. Hyacinth was about 5'6" tall, and although in her early 50s, she was still quite slim. A petite bone structure increased her sense of vulnerability. Her still blonde hair and sparkling green eyes made her a captivating sight. In a simple plain blue t-shirt, jeans and tan leather shoes, she looked $1 million. The ladies settled to amicable chit-chat, and despite the tea being served with lemon and not milk, the group fell into easy friendship. "We were hoping that, if you enjoyed the fete, you might consider joining our little group. You don't have to get involved with any duties or contributions, unless you want to, of course. We're quite a friendly bunch, you know," said May. "Oh, how lovely of you to think of me. I'd never even considered the possibility, but I don't see why not. I'll consider it certainly. I know that I've lived here for a few years, but I've never really managed to make much effort socially. I suppose it would help me to get to know people better, said Hyacinth. Beth encouraged the conversation along by asking about Hyacinth's son in America and then complimenting her on her garden. It was difficult to do otherwise. I designed the garden, said Hyacinth with evident pride, even if it were hidden under a disarming blush. I do some of the maintenance work, but it's much too big for me to manage without help. I have a regular gardener who does a lot of the heavy manual work. Could you imagine a garden party here? It'd be fantastic, said May. You need to meet Kirsty. You get on famously. She's an avid gardener. You really ought to show her around here. I can admire and enjoy it, but Kirsty would appreciate what you've done here to the full. I know that Drew has worked with your husband in the past. He does the artistic realisations of the architectural drawings, but I've never had the chance of properly getting to know you, said Beth. I can't really muscle in on a business meeting, so it's been tricky to find an avenue of introduction. I didn't like to just barge in, so I concocted this plan to come and see you, and of course we really would like you to join our group. I'm afraid that I've purposefully kept myself away from village life. I suppose that it's common knowledge that Conrad was sent to prison, and I just hid myself away, really. It's so embarrassing thinking that everybody is staring at you or talking about you, said Hyacinth. Yes, I take your point, said May. It's hard enough to fit in with a small village set at the best of times. Emma's friend Henrietta has found it difficult. She has her own web of intrigue. She always wears a wedding ring, but no man has ever been seen. It's obviously a taboo subject, which makes folks talk about it all the more. Don't worry if you feel like people are talking about you, and no doubt some are, but they talk about everybody without discrimination. There's no real malice in the gossips. They just don't have much else to think about. I really shouldn't let it worry you. It'll give them a spicy new subject for a brief season, and then they'll run out of information and find a new topic. I think that you'll find that you're already old news. They've got plenty to gossip about since John died at the fête. Yes, I knew about that. A young policeman came to see Conrad about him the other day. It really frightened me. Touching old wounds, if you can understand. Hearing a policeman at the gate again was quite a shock. Conrad was really angry that he came here, although he was quite a nice young man. That'd be Bobby Maddox. His name is Robert, and it's the height of hilarity here for folks to call him Bobby, being a policeman. Small minds, her, said Beth. Poor you. I'm sure it did give you a shock. Maddox would never have come if he'd have thought it had upset you. I suppose he has his job to do, though. Why did he come here? Was it because you were at the fête, or did Conrad know John? Said May. I'm not entirely sure. It's probably for a bit of both of those reasons. I really don't think there was much to say of help either way. I didn't like to think that Conrad was in for a session of questioning about a death for any reason. I suppose they have to ask around though, don't they? Said Hyacinth. I suppose I'll have to come clean and tell you that my twin brother is the policeman in charge of the case. I hope you won't hold it against me, said Beth. The way you say case makes it all sound quite sinister, as if something untoward was going on, said Hyacinth. Oh, I wouldn't go as far as that. I think it's just a matter of going through the motions until they are really sure that all is as it at first seems, said Beth. Catching the drift that Beth was steering the conversation towards, May took up the cue to help drive it forward a little further still. I gather that John had got himself into something of a tizzy. I think there were queries about the nature of his business interests. Is that right? That's the impression I'm under. I wonder if it all got a bit too much for him. I understand that he was considering taking some pretty drastic measures, said Beth. Hyacinth began to colour at this stage of the conversation, as the subject matter was obviously getting a little too close to home. Oh, I am sorry, said Beth. You mustn't think that we're bothered by your husband's colourful past, even if it was only one brief splash of colour. Don't forget that Drew works with Conrad at times. If we were bothered, it would have surfaced in their business relationship. I guess we all just want to share in your spice, in exchange for an introduction into our rather placid lifestyle. Does that seem like a fair exchange?" Beth's blunt appraisal of the situation was quite disarming. There was no need to attempt to hide anything, and so Hyacinth was put completely at her ease. Her facial expression visibly changed as her muscles relaxed and the colour in her cheeks settled. She was positively radiant now. She didn't need to pretend or present a rehearsed facade, as her new friends knew the worst and yet still sought her friendship. "You must excuse my skittishness. I'm afraid that I've got used to living in a defensive mode," said Hyacinth. "Well, I'm glad that's cleared up then," said Beth. "Is there any more of that delicious green tea stuff, or are we in your way? I don't want to stop you from getting on." There was no evidence of any need to get on with anything. In fact, evidence suggested that Hyacinth's time was her own, and she must have just a little too much of it hanging heavy on her hands. Although Beth was now convinced that Hyacinth was indeed lonely, she couldn't help but envy the luxury that she enjoyed. Nevertheless, Beth could respect the strength and dignity with which Hyacinth had met her isolation, and the resourceful way in which it was evident that she had spent her days. Breaking her train of thought, Beth refocused on the task in hand and raised her mug expectantly. "I rather think that it's my brother that's in a bit of a tizzy. He needs to know exactly what John's worries were and how they might have affected his health." May nodded emphatically and tried to add another factor to the conversation. "I get the impression that Jean wasn't much support at times." "Yes, I think that's right," said Hyacinth. Both Beth and May were surprised to hear such confident affirmation about someone who, as far as they knew, she had never met. Their surprise must have shown in their shocked expressions. "I didn't think you knew Jean. Is her reputation as bad as all that?" asked May. "Oh no, I didn't know her at all. It's just something that Conrad said. He spoke to John at the fête. They must have known each other through some business connection. I think that's why the sergeant came over to speak to Conrad. I liked him, by the way, once I'd got over the shock of a policeman ringing at the gate. He seems really cute. He must have all the girls after him." "I think he could if he noticed them. Unfortunately, he's too busy admiring Henrietta, the only young female in the village who hasn't shown any interest in him at all. It's that mysterious left-hand ring at work again," said Beth. "I suppose you had your work cut out for you in sticking next to Conrad through his recent tricky patch," said May, getting back to the more needful topics. "I don't know that you could ever really say that," said Hyacinth. "I'd never find it difficult to stick next to Conrad. We still love each other very much. It was everything else that was difficult, the worry of what people would think. Of course, I was shocked that he would cross the line between clever business and dodgy business, and I was embarrassed that he had to go to prison. I think that Conrad had warned John from doing anything drastic in his recent worries and told him to learn from his own mistake. He said he'd told him to stop being stupid and to think of his wife." "That seems natural enough in the circumstances," said Beth. "It does, but John's response was very bizarre," said Hyacinth. "Conrad told me that John gave a sickening laugh and said, 'My dear chap, that's exactly what I am thinking of.' Apparently he shook himself off a bit after that little outburst and, pulling his act together, said that no doubt Conrad was right and he'd take heed of his kind advice." "What a weird thing to say," said Beth. "They seemed to get along okay. Maybe they weren't very demonstrative in their affection to each other, but that doesn't signify much. You don't think he wanted a spell inside just to get away from Jean, do you?" "Surely not," said May. "Poor Hyacinth, we're treading on your sore toes again. I'm sorry," said Beth. "But don't you worry, we've got plenty of sore patches ourselves, as you'll find once you get to know us." They tactfully manoeuvred the conversation into less troubled waters and were soon engrossed in telling Hyacinth all about Kirsty's garden. Did you go on the guided tour around Kirsty's garden on the day of the fête? Asked May. Of course, it isn't anything like as grand as your gardens here, and perhaps she works towards a less manicured style than you'd like. Nevertheless, she is very knowledgeable, and you might enjoy seeing each other's different style of approach. I'm afraid I didn't make it onto the guided tour. I would have liked to, but I didn't think Conrad really wanted to go. I didn't want to drag him around unwillingly, and I didn't want to go on my own, so I just didn't bother in the end. I wasn't sure what to expect either, so I didn't think it was worth making a fuss about, said Hyacinth. That's just as well then in the end. You can see it properly as a friend. We'll take you over as soon as you like. I know you two will get along famously. In fact, I'm already regretting offering the introduction, as once you two get started, I think May and I will fall by the wayside, said Beth. Just then Conrad walked into the kitchen. They hadn't heard him come in, and he seemed surprised to see his wife comfortably sitting at the kitchen table, chatting away to people who were obviously new friends. He seemed genuinely pleased to see his wife so happy in new company and engaging in what should be a natural exchange between ladies, but had eluded her since they had moved there. Have I missed a tea party? He said. Hello, darling, said Hyacinth. She jumped up to kiss him on the cheek. Again Conrad seemed pleasantly surprised at the ease of her public display of affection, rather than embarrassment of him in company. I think you know Beth Williams. You work with her husband, Drew, sometimes, and you also met at the fête, said Hyacinth, introducing her new friends. And this is May. They've come to ask me if I want to join the WI. Hello, of course, I thought I recognised Beth. That sounds like a good idea. It'd do you good, said Conrad. For the full book of Fête Fatale, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.